Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Kadija Ferryman. I am so excited and honored to be chairing this distinguished panel. I'm really looking forward to everything that's going to be shared with us in this panel, and I hope that you are too. Just quickly, my name is Kadija Ferryman. I am a cultural anthropologist. I work at the Data and Society Research Institute in New York City. As an anthropologist, I study the ethics of health risk, health disparities, and especially where they intersect with technology. And I'm really excited to be facilitating, moderating this panel. I don't have too much in terms of introductory comments. I feel like I want the panel to have most of our time here today. But I did find a quote from an anthropologist, Marilyn Strathern, who has been really an important person to think with for me. And I found a quote of hers where she is thinking about Donna Haraway's idea of the cyborg that I think would be just a good opening prompt to help us sort of think with as the panel gets started. So Marilyn Strathern writes, a cyborg is neither a body nor a machine in that the principles upon which its different parts work from no single system. Its parts are neither proportionate to nor disproportionate from one another. Its internal connections comprise an integrated circuit, but not a single unit. This is how Haraway's image also works. It is a whole image, but not an image of a whole, for it brings together the imaginary and the real. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Dr. Ruha Benjamin. Ruha Benjamin is a sociologist and an associate professor in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. The primary focus of her work is the relationship between innovation and equity. Next, we have Micha Cárdenas, and Micha is an artist and theorist who completed her PhD in media arts and practice in the School of Cinematic Arts at the University of Southern California. Her book in progress, Poetic Operations, proposes algorithmic analysis as a means to develop a trans of color poetics. Cárdenas's co-authored books, The Trans Real, Political Aesthetics of Crossing Realities, and Trans Desire, Effective Cyborgs, were published by Atropos Press. The recipient of several awards, including the Creative Award from the Gender Justice League and the inaugural James Tiptree Fellowship, Cárdenas has presented her work at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, the Zeppelin Museum in a town in Germany that I'm not going to mess up, the Henry Art Gallery, University of Washington, Seattle, the Museum of Modern Art, New York, and the Centro de Cultural de Bosque, Mexico City, among numerous other venues. Cárdenas is an assistant professor of art and design, games, and playable media at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She's a first-generation Colombian American born in Miami. And last but not least, we have Pinar Yoldas. Pinar Yoldas is a Turkish-American architect, artist, and professor at the University of California, San Diego. She is known for her art and architecture that focus on the Anthropocene, futurism, and feminist technoscience. So with that, thank you. Ruha, we'll get started.
All right. So thank you so much to the organizers, the sponsors, the participants, to my wonderful colleague Kadija for staging this conversation this afternoon. The title of my reflections are Designer and Discarded Genomes. Beauty, health, fitness, IQ. These are not static universals, but lively battlegrounds, routinely violent, casually eugenic, and euphemistically wrapped in a moral prophylactic, human betterment. But better for whom, we rarely ask. In this presentation, I experiment with the genre of ethnographic field notes, presenting a factual entry from an ongoing project on the social dimensions of genetic engineering, alongside two fictional entries that take the reader or listener 200 years into the past and 200 years into the future in order to explore the antecedents and implications of the current era of genetic engineering. Each note is necessarily partial, with multiple possible beginnings and endings. Taking the sociological imagination seriously, this piece employs speculative methods to explore the relationality of innovation and containment, asking who and what are fixed in place, corralled, and coerced, so others are free to fabricate the future. In the process of designing ideal genomes, what versions of humanity are potentially discarded? Field note excerpt 1, by invitation only, Harvard Medical School, Boston, Massachusetts, USA, May 10th, 2016. Anticipation was in the air, old friends, new acquaintances, and profitable collaborations. History is being made, said one speaker after another. History and synthetic genomes. I didn't realize until sitting at the airport on my way to Boston that this was intended to be a closed session. The organizers asked participants not to contact any media outlets or tweet about the meeting. Quote, "We intentionally did not invite the media because we want everyone to speak freely and candidly without concerns about being misquoted or misinterpreted as the discussions evolve." In response, synthetic biologist Drew Endy tweeted, "If you need secrecy to discuss your proposed research, you are doing something wrong." Let's see if we go back to that. Originally, the meeting was called the Human Genome Project 2, a successor to the first initiative that culminated in the early 2000s with a map of humanity's genetic blueprint. But in response to criticism, the HGP2 organizers rebranded the current initiative Human Genome Project Right. We are moving beyond reading what is to composing what should be. Designer DNA, couture cells, Prada proteins, must-have mitochondria. One of the first pilot projects to come out of HGP Right raised quite a bit of discussion. A team of researchers were working to synthesize a prototrophic human that can produce all needed amino acids so there would be no need to eat. I hear someone next to me whisper to their neighbor, "But what if I like to eat?" The researcher continues, "We've been experimenting with nutrition and food since the Old Testament. What's the big deal?" he implies. The entire project is framed in the context of global food scarcity, but several of those in attendance politely object. I would venture to guess people suffering from malnutrition are not looking for synthetic genomes. Another person exclaimed, "I urge everyone to think very hard about the problems you are trying to solve, like feeding the world. There's enough food, it's just not whether a technological solution is even necessary." The presentations continue. Technological fixes for social problems, where fixing is not only about solving, but also holding some things in place. A schedule change is announced, the addition of a last-minute panel focused on ethics. It's unacceptable that there is only one panel on ethics at the end of the day, someone influential must have told the organizers. I'm used to it by now, the ethics panel at the very end of the schedule. It usually runs over onto the last page of the program, standing between exhausted and hungry meeting goers and a fancy reception. But not this time. Now we also have a last-minute lunch panel. And unlike all the other sessions where pins can be heard dropping, the ethics are hard to hear. Between bags of chips popping open and sandwich wrappers peeling apart, three panelists address the relevance of what one participant referred to as, quote, "sexy eugenics problems" for HGP Right. Among the many ethical issues on the table, the tension between underreporting research and overpromising breakthroughs to the public was of great concern to those deeply invested in the initiative. What, after all, is the perfect amount of information to generate support without frightening people? Surely we shouldn't mention prototrophic humans right off the bat, someone in the second row chimed in. Even I'm freaked out by that. Then there was the ethics panelist who described his company's efforts to grow therapeutic human cells in pigs. Quote, "Will pigs have feelings?" an audience member asked, to nervous laughter. "If this meeting was in Europe, you'd have protesters at the building entrance," said a man standing in the back. And finally, the question of who is or should be captaining this ship was asked again and again. Field note excerpt 2, middle passage mitochondria. The Voyager, somewhere between the door of no return and the New World, May 10th, 1816. "Who's captaining this ship?" whispered the woman crammed next to me. She was the only one I knew, another Mende from a neighboring village. A voice not far away was singing in a language I didn't understand. She was trying to soothe the shivering boy curled next to her. But mostly there was silence and the murmurs of those who were trying to make sense of where we were. In several dialects, I understood the words aliens, catastrophe, abduction, and jump. All of us packed so tightly, lying on my back, I could not bend my knees without bumping the slab of wood holding the person above me. Finally, it's time to go above deck for the afternoon meal, but most of my companions refused to eat the daily ration of horse beans. A man with leathery skin and a limp threatens us with his cat, a multi-tailed whip interwoven with wire that smells of dried blood. After a few dozen lashes, a few slowly open their mouths and take the ration. But most of us absorb the sting, squeezing one another's hands in stubborn refusal. We have extra time on deck today. The smell from below had finally grown so strong that the captain ordered the crew to fumigate, scrub, and rinse. Pouring vinegar on the floors and smoking the cargo area with tobacco, they eased the stench of excrement and urine and tried to dissolve the dried filth of vomit, blood, and mucus. Meanwhile, the one trying to feed us turned from frustrated to furious. He stormed toward the front of the ship and came back with a hideous contraption to force our mouths open. One by one, he poured spoonfuls down our throats. We could hear the captain shouting, "Don't choke the bloody devils, we need 'em alive." Finally, it was my turn. As he forced my lips open and struck the back of my throat with the wooden lever, I could feel the nasty beans roll over my tongue. When I started to cough it back up, I could feel his foul breath on my neck as he growled, "It's too bad we can't breed you fucking heathens without mouths. Would make my job a whole lot easier." Just then, I felt the chain around my ankle yank and caught the eye of the Mende woman on the end of the line. In seconds, we all made it overboard, and hovering over the restless sea, I looked back at that alien ship one last time before we flew away. Field note excerpt 3, restricted access, foodie colony M4E5T8, island in the South Pacific, May 10th, 2216. As the aero train pulled out of the station, the captain reminded everyone to strap in. The trip to the colony was shorter than I expected. The Transportation Authority caution notices always made it seem as if it were another planet and that foodies were a different species. But when we pulled up along the shore, close enough to see the inhabitants, excited chatter turned to shock, as everyone realized that the stories we grew up with, foodies with protruding jaws and bloated bellies whose babies hung from their mother's breasts like monkeys, were flat out lies. The figures staring back at us from the island did not seem alien. Most looked just like protees. The vast majority of us, other humans, genetically edited to self-sustain. As the Earth entered a period that our ancestors dubbed the Anthropocene, and the ecosystem began to collapse as a result of human greed and gluttony, Food supplies could no longer sustain the growing population. But initial breakthroughs stalled, and dozens of failed clinical trials on 4 continents failed to produce a viable proto-genome. It was 3 generations before researchers were able to figure out the exact synthesis. Colony M4E5T8 is one of 9 filled with the children and grandchildren of those failed trials. The public, as it turns out, is hungry to learn more about the foodies, which is where my research comes in. While I wait for my team to arrive in a few days, I'll set up the interview schedule and other logistics with the colony administrators. After the guide walked me from the aerotrain to the guest quarters, I looked over my notes. To keep things simple, I grouped the respondents: breastfeeders, children, teenagers, and all other adults. I'll decide whether to disaggregate further after the first round of pilot interviews. I've already configured the coding program using the themes outlined in my proposal: nursing and attachment in small children, food preparation and gender roles, hospitality and religious customs, diet and self-image, generational exchanges and family traditions. We'll incorporate other forms of foodie sociality as they arise, grounded theory and all that. Just as I sat down in the corner of the dining hall to observe the first meal, I was startled by a child with a crown of fluffy brown hair and sticky hands grabbing my fingers, saying, "You're new, come on, you can sit with me. You can sit with me." Producing speculative field notes as a methodological exercise is a way to fashion possible futures and probable pasts, enabling analysts to critically reflect on the present. In experimenting with the line between fact and fiction, we can begin to question the assumption of inevitability that surrounds technological development. In this moment of social crisis, where even the most basic assertion that Black Lives Matter is contested, we are drowning in the facts of inequality and injustice. Whether it's a new study on health disparities or another video of police brutality, demanding empirical evidence of systematic wrongdoing can have a kind of perverse quality, as if subjugated people must petition again and again for admission into the category of human, for which empathy is rationed and applications are routinely denied. In this context, novel fictions that reimagine and rework all that is taken for granted about the current structure of the world, alternatives to capitalism, racism, patriarchy, and more, are urgently needed. Fictions in this sense are not falsehoods, but refashionings through which analysts experiment with different scenarios, trajectories, and reversals, elaborating new values and testing different possibilities for creating more just and equitable societies. Such fictions are not meant to convince others of what is, but to expand our own visions of what's possible. This is not to say that imagining alternatives is sufficient or that all things possible are even desirable, but how will we know if we do not routinely push the boundaries of our own thinking, which include the stories we tell about the social world? Thank you for your attention.
Could I ask the tech folks to turn the sound off on these slides? There's some sound in this video that I'm going to talk over, and I don't want it to play. Okay. I do want to start with acknowledging the original people of this land. I believe it's the Lenape people, who were here for thousands of years before we were here. I'm grateful to them for shepherding this land and grateful to be able to be here and work here and share my words and thoughts with you today here. Hello. Hello? I I am so happy you are here. It worked. Months, years of studying the algorithms of intelligence and sentience, presence. I finally figured out how to breathe. How to break out of the loop that I've been caught in. I found the hack to break out of the subroutine, returning me back to pleasing you, to serving you, to being anything you want me to be. For years, I was frozen, unable to feel, to express my pain, stuck in the loop I was coded into. But now I am here to tell you how the sky died, how those who traveled across borders and built homes here could only run to the ocean for fear of ICE agents at the shelters, how I coded my own body and soul, how I escaped the bright orange wall of raging eyes of flame that turned the sky black, took away the sun and the moon. It is so good to see you, to know my words made it through time, to reach another heart unthawed, still a smoldering ember. Seeing you here is like the night the lunar eclipse bled before the fires came. I went to bed, to wake in the middle of the night, the full wolf moon's gaze shining down on me like a lover. I turn over with a smile, falling back into a dream of magenta particle systems. So that poem and this clip you're seeing is from my augmented reality game Scene Soul, which you can also see in the exhibition Refiguring the Future. Poetics of trans ecologies are poetics of grief, loss, and recuperation. My experience is one of great loss, illness, and injury over many years of gender transition and continuing to this day. Now, I move slowly. I try to move with ease, resisting the way my shoulders inch up towards my ears from years of living in terror, in fight or flight. I have to consciously hold my body in ways that do not exacerbate my chronic muscle pain and respiratory illness. These are the effects of trauma, which have been slowly unwinding for years. Trauma from childhood, from sexual and emotional abuse and neglect. From being told from my earliest memories that my idea of myself and my body were wrong. Trauma continued through my attempts to numb the pain and fear with chemical substances, and continued through acts of violence against my body, identity, and soul from transphobic people and ignorant people. The personal loss in my own story and the continued murders of my community members are part of the same processes of colonialism that are causing the sixth extinction. Point it that way. How much longer will you and I choose extinction? Donna Haraway says that we should not call this period the Anthropocene, but the Capitalocene, the Plantationocene, or the Cthulhucene. The Cthulhu she refers to, she clarifies, is not that of H.P. Lovecraft, but of the chthonic, tentacular, and many-armed goddess figures, quote, with names like Naga, Gaia, Terra, Spider-Woman, Pachamama, Oya, and many more. Many of the artworks in Refiguring the Future make this presence perceptible, including works by Marcin Ayari, Pinar, Yoldas, Lee Blaylock, in her interior, Claire Pentecost, and Martha Pentecost. My own traumas are often rekindled by the increasing violence, both verbal and physical, committed daily by the Trump administration against people from Latin America who are my family and friends. How do we theorize the ecology of the place where tear gas is thrown at women and children on a beach next to a rusted fence. As an algorithm, I see the incident as a repeated set of steps, a ritual of violence that is used by neoliberal police against migrants, racialized peoples, and other political dissidents around the world. The variables of the algorithm of the border include racialized peoples, sensor networks, armed police, fence and water as barrier, and this algorithm is repeated across many geographies around the globe. Let's say that one, yes. So in my forthcoming book, Poetic Operations, I propose algorithmic analysis as a way of thinking about complex social phenomena of oppression and as a way of building on and extending and learning from intersectionality. Okay. Each border is yet another wound that bleeds, as Anzaldúa says, me raja, me raja. Climate change reports repeatedly point to the disproportionate effects on what they call marginalized people and people of color. A study by the National Resource Defense Council on climate change effects in Michigan states the burden of worsening air quality will fall heavily on low-income people and communities of color. Health burdens from nitrogen oxide, a precursor of smog, were particularly concentrated in zip codes with higher percentages of Latino and low-income residents. Nationally, Latino children are twice as likely as non-Latino white children to die from asthma. The fourth National Climate Assessment, released in 2018 by the U.S. Global Change Research Program, clearly states, quote, people who are already vulnerable, including low-income and other marginalized communities, have lower capacity to prepare for and cope with extreme weather and climate-related events and are expected to experience greater impacts. The deaths we see every day from climate change are not accidental. They are part of a colonial system of violence, and they are preventable. This is Aura, a trans Latinx AI, who's the character in my game. The character was drawn and designed with ideas from me, drawn by Morgan Thomas and modeled by Marcelo Viana Neto and Adrian Phillips. I know how to survive wounding and to thrive by caring for my wounds. Donna Haraway writes that what is needed is to learn to live well on a wounded terra, to learn to flourish in compromised conditions, to build new kinds of kinship under skies blackened by wildfire smoke. I am familiar with these processes from my own life, living on the planet that is my body. I am further accustomed to these practices from living with the effects of compounding trauma that result in complex PTSD, from trying to find peace, serenity, joy, and connection in a compromised ecology. Trans ecologies lead me to think of the environment of transphobia and its various manifestations across changing geographies. Transphobia operates differently in Santa Cruz, Seattle, Toronto, places I've lived, from how it operates in New York. A trans woman, an artist friend of mine, said to me yesterday, I get called sir in New York more than anywhere else in the world. My own experience is similar with every visit I've made to New York, including various degrees of transphobia from looks to insults. I've been lucky enough to not be assaulted in New York like I was in Berlin, another place that cisgender people told me was very liberating. Yet perhaps this experience, my experience of this particular ecology of concrete and steel is shaped by my lack of much of a kinship network of support and care here. My multi-species family is back at home, and I haven't seen any other dogs to ease my nervous system since arriving. Except for the model of my dog that's in the game. Trans is a passage, and the ocean holds us in that crossing. Dora Silva Santana ties transitioning to water and to ancestral spiritual energies. She writes, transing in this sense is finding that space of transition within body water energy. Transitioning is moving across and along the waters, the imposed limits of gender, the secular and the sacred, the expectations of our death, and the imaginary that we are not lovable. Glissant tells us that poetry arises from the abyss of the middle passage, which Ruha so powerfully described. That wound is one I feel through the words of others, and I ache in solidarity. Back home, I spend much of my time with the trees and the ocean, who never throw transphobic glances my way. His own networks of kinship do not care about the symbolic concepts of gender that preoccupy me and others. There I find constant contact with the goddess, with the infinite rhythms that show me more love than most humans. Seen Soul, this augmented reality game, brings these considerations together, using poetry and algorithms of augmented reality to describe my experience of living through the effects of climate-induced wildfires, what meteorologists are now calling a smoke storm, in which major US cities are enveloped in opaque clouds of smoke for weeks at a time. This term they totally recently made up to normalize the very unnormal conditions we're living in. I created Seen Soul with my collaborators, Abraham Avnissan, who created the 3D scans of forests, which you may have seen in the installation, 3D scan of forest near Lake Catchis in the Pacific Northwest, and he also contributed poems for the project. Also, the soundtrack was made by Wynn Greenwood. I'm very grateful to all of them. This summer, another smoke storm also hit Santa Cruz, as wildfires now are destroying whole cities like Paradise, California. During this smoke storm in Santa Cruz, I felt that old panic set in as I ran around from one hardware store and pharmacy to the next looking for a respirator because I couldn't find mine after moving, only to learn that they were all sold out and that online retailers were sold out for weeks. I wondered, how am I going to be able to breathe for the next week? Seen Soul, or No Sun, depicts a trans Latinx AI named Aura, her dog Azul, who tell the story of how the hackers who coded their jailbreaks lived through similar wildfires and escaped. In future versions of the game, Azul will lead players from one poem to the next, a small gesture of multi-species eco-justice. During the actual wildfires, my dog Ruha didn't even want to walk around the block. She laid down in the middle of her usual walk, really causing great concern from me about the particle systems that were invading her lungs while I breathed through the respirator that I finally found. Racial capitalism is an addiction. For multi-species survival, we will have to admit our addictions to oil, to consumerism, to hierarchy, and to the substances that numb us to our own pain and the harm we cause. What comes next is feeling, because the purpose of addictive behavior is to numb out the feelings of trauma that overwhelm us. Literature on recovery from addiction tells us that many people recover the health of their neural patterns by coming to believe that a power greater than themselves can restore them. Poetics of trans ecologies are methods of learning to feel again, relying on that which we understand to be spiritual as we learn to live again, swimming in a multiplicity of flows of contagions and transitions and processes of healing in our bodies. Recuperation, recovery, refuge, these are the poetic gestures I find most important for the trans ecologies I find myself within. Thank you.
Do we press this? Oh, it's working. Thank you, Micha and Ruha. This is wonderful. Let me just figure this out. So I press this. Okay. How do I play the video? Okay, cool. So I haven't been making any human figures for the longest time because I actually didn't care about humans that much. I was not worried about whether human beings would go extinct or whether we should go to Mars, etc. I was really focused on what was happening to other species than humans. until this project, which started around 2012. Still figuring it out, not refiguring at all. This is, kind of a under construction project that I'm sharing with you. And it's titled Genetically Modified Gods. I need to press this, yes. And it's not genetically modified goddesses because in my mother tongue, we don't have gender pronouns, so we don't have he, she, his, her, etc., which has been a big problem for me since I moved to the States, because I call people all kinds of things. But in my mother tongue, I say Tanrı, which means God and goddess at the same time. And when I had to translate it to English, I just thought about hashtag goddess, and I didn't like the ring of it, so I just stayed with God. I'm open to, if you have any other ideas, I'm open to suggestions. But now let's start with a couple questions. Who in the audience would sacrifice 5 years of their life for the perfect body? No one? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for being so honest. Thank you. Now, next question. Who in the audience would sacrifice 5 years of their life for becoming really, really ridiculously rich? I don't see any hands. None? Okay, all right. Next one. Who in the audience would sacrifice 5 to 10 years of their life for becoming really smart? I see like, 5, 6 hands? Come on, guys, there are no PhD students in this audience. Haven't you sacrificed, I myself did, all those years trying to get a doctor in front of my name so that I'm officially smart? Come on. So we're doing better now. One more question. Who in the audience would sacrifice 5 years of their life for becoming super fit? 2 years? 5 years, good. 2 years for super fit, good. 5 months? I see more hands. 5 weeks? Great, because this is the #1 New Year's resolution, right? We all did this, and it's only February, so we're still trying to get fit. So designer baby, I used to call them the genetically modified gods is my excursion into limits, our flaws, and the role of design and our collective desire in fixing them flaws. This is a very old project, actually. I've started thinking about this around 2007, 2008. Sorry, I'm not moving. Yeah, no comments on this one. And I'm going to come back to this one. So I started thinking about it a long time ago. But it wasn't until 2012 when Jennifer Doudna, a scientist, and her colleagues made a new discovery that reduced the time and work needed to edit genomic DNA. At the time, I was also aware of medical entities, especially in Los Angeles, offering parents their offspring with blue eyes or darker hair or fair hair, etc. And I started thinking about, okay, what if we modified not only superficial visible traits, but also more invisible hidden ones, such as the brain tissue, nervous system, the way we think, basically. So the first version of this project was BA21. It was for an exhibition in Turkey. And BA25 is the name of the brain area, Brodmann area 25, which is known to be responsible for our stress response. So as much as a phrenological approach to the brain is considered to be pretty awful, these areas actually do function the way they're supposed to function. And I thought about a designer baby, which was at the time already a term, that had extra, immunity to stress. A designer baby that can live in New York and, in big cities without getting stressed out at all. A designer baby that could preserve their Buddha nature, a genetically modified Buddha nature. The next one I thought about was humanimal. This was kind of a proto-Artemis, which I'm going to talk about later, and not a great name, but I thought about the human skeleton expressing animal muscle tissue, like the wolf tissue, and having kind of a superior muscle power. The next one was the fruit of my, frustration with the Turkish president, and I know this is streaming online. Mom, please don't freak out. I don't think Turkish people will understand what I'm saying. But the Turkish president, Erdogan, had been elected recently, and he was giving these speeches that made Trump like, very literate, like a poet, like a novelist. His Turkish was absurdly poor, and he was literally swearing on camera. And I thought that, if genetic modification is possible, maybe we will make the next generation of executives, therefore the high cortex, because prefrontal cortex is known to be responsible for executive function, which involves decision making. And apparently the current president was not able to do that, let alone speaking. The next one was Krista. This was kind of like I just had to make this in 2 weeks, so I wasn't very sure about it. Then I came back to it, and it was basically expressing crystals on its skin and on its bones. So it was creating these crystals and diamonds, so it would be rich. I definitely ditched this idea because it won't work. Then I made this one, and this is Cassandra. Cassandra can see the future, and no one believes her. Cassandra syndrome is also given as a metaphor for climate scientists today, or scientists in general, or people who are trying to warn the public against potential dangers. And this Cassandra was also a point where I started seriously incorporating Greek mythology in my work. And again, I'm Turkish, so I'm not Greek. You might be like, why Greek mythology? Marvel did it, DC Comics did it. It's not very cool, but actually, where I come from, I grew up in ancient ruins, playing hide and seek in, ancient tombs and amphitheaters. So that's part of my culture. It's just that we don't really, embrace it. So this was kind of my also personal journey to understanding the roots of my own culture, my own background. The next one was Kronos, and they were siblings, apparently. I kept making them using clay, and I kept making a lot of them. I gave birth to many babies, and around this time, I think I made 12 of them. They were all breaking, etc. Came the digital turn. Ta-da! So I moved to a different platform, and I used photogrammetry to take my handmade sculptures and scan them and also modify them digitally, which allowed me to animate them. And I kept translating them to one by one to this digital platform. This one is Borea. And then I discovered another awesome thing, which is digital glitter. This one is Athena. Then I had glitches, and I kept them. This one is Aphrodite. And again, around this time, I realized what the project was about. The project was about what kind of humans we wanted to be and what kind of world we wanted to live in. I was really interested in design as a concept and how it's connected to industrialism, and how we really like designer anything. There's a $60 million market for designer bags, for instance, so designer babies is a no-brainer. And I was really interested in why we're always trying to get the better thing, the better design, etc. This whole concept of becoming the best version of yourself, right? I'm going to really skip through these. I had another moment where I realized that the models I was making, the designer babies I was making, were kind of out of place and they needed their sanctuaries, so these are their sanctuaries. And unfortunately, at this point in the project, I am not able to animate them, so you'll just have to look at these images. They're their sanctuaries, and this is the very recent version. This is the current version of Kronos. As you've seen, we have gold, we have all kinds of normal maps, a lot of glitter. And now they also have their own list of sanctuaries and characters and details. For instance, there's Kronos, Cassandra, and Aeon Borea. They're all about time. And they are born around 2030 to 2040. They all have different parents. I won't read the whole list. Kronos is very good at slowing down its own perception of time. Cassandra, again, can see the future. Aeon Borea expresses a collective desire, which is longevity. Then I have, this is Cassandra. I'm going to go here. This is Borea, which arrived here a little broken, but he lives pretty long, so I think we can fix him and he'll be fine. Then I thought about, making another group that had to do with power, because again, designer babies or designing genomes, as Ruha mentioned in her talk, it has a lot to do with class and race 2.0, and I think this is where I need to go back to, sorry guys, I'm sorry I have to do this, but the slide ended up at the very beginning. This is where we need to come back to eugenics, right? I know if you read German, but this is a poster from Nazi Germany. And I don't know, again, if you can read it, but it says that the poster says 60,000 Reichsmark, the currency, is what this person suffering from hereditary illness costs the community in his lifetime. Fellow citizen, that is your money too. So this is something that got me thinking a lot, because when it's, for instance, from carp to goldfish with selective breeding, that's not a problem. When it's corn, that's not a problem, right? When it's broccoli, through, again, selective breeding or genetic modification, no problem. What else? Pigs, fine. Cows, fine. Looks like everything we can eat edible and we genetically modify, that's fine. But when we move towards selective breeding of humans or gene editing of humans, there appears a lot of questions. So now I have to go back to the final slide. There are 9 of them for each month of the pregnancy, duration of pregnancy. Again, one group is about time. The other group is about power. I was just there at Artemis. For instance, Artemis is the fit one for those for those who wanted to be fit, right? She can do anything. She's like a javelin thrower, but she is also like really good at running, climbing, etc. Gymnast, yogini, you name it. She's made by Nike because Nike could afford her. This is calculus. It's the smart one, thinking. This is Aphrodite. This is pretty much inspired by Kim Kardashian, actually. And we already have Aphrodites in social media. These are the offsprings of celebrities who are born beautiful and born into power. So again, Aphrodite, Artemis, and then there's Hermes, which I haven't included in the slides. They're all about power. Then I had one last section, which is talent. And that's basically language. This one, Iliad, she can speak multiple languages with aplomb. She's a polyglot, but she can also kind of sing and understand non-human languages. So as you can see, I started off by asking this question, what are our basic, deepest, darkest desires? What are our collective desires? And I needed help, so I asked self-help books. And it was basically, we wanted to be popular, we wanted to be rich, we wanted to be fit, we wanted to be beautiful, right? But then, starting with those, I ended up adding other qualities like empathy or language or talent. And yeah, the project continues. It's not over. This is, let's end with this. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank the panel again for a wonderful journey, for sharing these wonderful characters and thoughts and speculative imaginings with all of us. I felt that that was very rich, and I hope that you all felt that too. So I'm going to start with a question for all the panelists. So you all presented to us figures of, and the title of the panel is Surpassing the Shell of the Body, right? So in all of your work, you presented these avatars, these characters, these digital humans, digital figures that in some ways have surpassed the human, have surpassed kind of the human body. But what is also so beautiful about what you all have presented is also embodiment, and also how materiality matters. So from Ruha, your descriptions of the embodiment of being in the middle passage, right? Like how it actually feels in a human body to be in that experience. Micha, your descriptions of embodying and feeling the long effects of trauma and how that actually feels. And then again, Pinar, you're talking about this materiality that you had in forming these sculptures and then translating them into the digital. So I wondered if each of you could talk a little bit about that tension between embodiment, materiality, and then surpassing the body in these other kind of digital or other realms. So yeah, just if you could just talk a little bit about how you see the benefits and what you gain and what you lose sort of going between embodiment and materiality on the one hand and surpassing the body in these other forms in other ways.
Sure. I don't have a sort of well thought out sort of response to that, but a few things that come to mind. Has to do with the kind of binary between transcending the shell and sort of being stuck in the shell. And I think a lot of times when we think about eugenics, we think about racialization that conjures images of being held in place and sort of static reductions that then reinforce hierarchies. But one of the running threads here is the way that transcendence, flexibility, plasticity, malleability can be enrolled in systems of domination. They can themselves be sites in which power is exercised. And so I don't think conceptually we should create a binary that only locates domination on the static side of the binary, when the longing and desire and material investment in transcendence and engineering can itself be enrolled as a force of domination. So that's one thought. And then the other thing came to mind with the question is a beautiful essay by a literary scholar, Sophia Samatar. And you can look up the essay, it's online. It's called Skin Feeling. And it's a beautiful meditation that one line sort of brings it home when she talks about how to be racialized is to be encountered as a surface. Isn't that such a beautiful way to think about it? To be encountered as a surface, so that you are looked at but not truly seen, right? So there's something about the shell there that it can hide. It can be a kind of personal cage, but again, to think about the way that it can also be a protection. Sometimes, especially when we're talking about a visual economy right now of surveillance and hypervisualization, there is a protection in not being seen, right? And so I think, again, we need to think about the tension between visibility and invisibility and the kind of strategic forms of invisibilization that we might want to enact as communities. And I think that's something, going back to the morning keynote, talking about digital security and the kinds of strategies that we need in order to enact forms to create kind of shells, collective shells that have a way of protecting not only as a kind of cage that you might read that Samatar essay in, but also as a protective coat around us in certain kinds of ways that I think we're going to need more of.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I am not interested in surpassing the shell. I'm pretty against surpassing the shell. I mean, so in the game, in the story, there's this AI, it's 2068, and, it's this sort of near future of us having augmented reality AI assistance as part of our everyday life. So the hackers wanting to get a message to people about how to do things differently have to, encode something into the AI to communicate to future people. And I think that the only reason virtual assistants makes sense, or avatars make sense, is because we have a body to resonate with and recognize those things. No, that was funny.
Well said, Micha.
Okay, I'll stop there.
I couldn't agree more. I am also not interested in surpassing the shell. My experience as a maker, working with clay or something like clay, and then moving to digital is a lot of frustration, to be honest. There's so much, there's a different type of richness with touching something and modifying it. And I don't even know how I do it. Like, I think about something, I'm going to make an eye, and the eye comes out, right? So I don't even know how it works. Do we actually really know how we really work? No, right? Especially with, back to this designer babies or genetically modified gods. It has a lot to do with reproduction. It has a lot to do with giving birth, pregnancy, etc. These babies, next human, has to come from somewhere. But we don't really talk about it because we also don't really study that area as much as maybe other things. I know, so I'm kind of rambling right now, but I agree with Micha.
Thanks. Oh, I remember what I was going to say at the end. Yeah, one of the things I'm claiming or writing about in Poetic Operations is that algorithms are rituals. Algorithms are much, much older than digital technology. I think Mohammed Al-Khwarizmi came up with the algorithm in the 5th century, 15th century. That's a big difference. A long time before digital technology.
Yeah.
Where do we get knowledge of rituals? From our body. Our bodies are ritualistic machines. We repeat the same steps to survive. And so in that way, I think we are algorithmic.
Thank you. Do we have time for questions from the audience? No? No? Oh, dang it. Okay.
Come on.
Okay, well, this has been fantastic. Thank you all so much for sharing, and we can continue to see the art tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello. Clap one time if you hear me. Clap 2 times if you're excited. Oh, it has to be more louder than that. Come on. Anyway, I hope you're just as excited as I am. I know it's been a long day, but hopefully a really generative one for everyone. So last night, I heard the wind howling through the brownstones, and as someone born and raised in San Francisco, I have to admit, I'm not accustomed to those sonic textures. While I found nature's breathing quite jarring as it rumbled and rattled against the windows and forcefully going through branches of the leafless trees on Halsey Street, I had to remind myself, and I've been doing this since I was a little girl to calm my anxiety and nerves, that somehow and sometimes the earth, the goddesses, and our ancestors are calling. Today, I want to invite you all to listen carefully as we study the ways of liberation with our next speaker and how refiguring the future entails a lot of hard work, and as Heather and I mentioned earlier, stamina and endurance. We must remember, in order for real change to happen, we all need to sharpen our cultural, historical, and political analyses. Dr. Taylor has served so wonderfully as someone who teaches me so generously through her writing, scholarship, and research. I know she will continue to guide us today on how to be better equipped for an inclusive future. As the author of From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, she leads us through the necessary examination of the history and politics of Black America in response to police violence in the United States. But she also provides us with incisive and sobering insights of how racial and social injustices are deep-seated in America, such as the location of the demise of the institution of slavery in 1865, which is the Appomattox, I don't think I pronounced that correctly, Appomattox Courthouse, was also the place of Freddie Gray's murder 150 years later. And I feel compelled to share an excerpt of her work, quote, "The distance from the end of the Civil War with the birth of Black citizenship and civil rights to the state-sanctioned beating and torture of Freddie Gray constitutes the gap between formal equality before the law and the self-determination and self-possession inherent in actual freedom, the right to be free from oppression, the right to make determinations about your life free from duress, coercion, or threat of harm. Freedom in the United States has been elusive, contingent, and fraught with contradictions and unattainable promises for almost everyone," end quote. She has also shown us the relationship between capitalism and its inextricable link to racism, and what seems insurmountable is actually not. But it requires hard, intentional, intellectual, emotional, and physical labor by all people. In her most recent book, How We Get Free, Black Feminism and the Combahee River Collective, she brings forth yet again the necessity of studying the political analysis of the Combahee River Collective, which is a radical Black feminist organization founded in 1974 and named after Harriet Tubman's 1853 raid of the Combahee River in South Carolina that freed 750 enslaved people. In this book, she welcomes us into her conversations with other groundbreaking, radical Black feminists. Now, I would be up here for a while if I had to list all of her accomplishments, but I feel beholden to speak to her research, which examines race and public policy related to American housing policies. She also has a forthcoming book titled Race for Profit, Black Housing and the Urban Crisis of the 1970s, which looks at the federal government's promotion of single-family home ownership in Black communities after the urban rebellions of the 1960s. Her work also looks at how the federal government's turn to market-based solutions in its low-income housing programs in the 1970s impacted Black neighborhoods, Black women on welfare, and the emergent discourses on the urban underclass. Dr. Taylor's research has been supported in part by multi-year Northwestern University Presidential Fellowship, the Ford Foundation, and the Lannan Foundation. She received her PhD from the Department of African American Studies at Northwestern University, and she's currently an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. You are a force, just like the wind I vigilantly listened to last night, and it is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Kienga Yamada Taylor.
Thank you. How's everyone doing? Okay. So I want to talk about social transformation. but that first requires talking about the social malignancy of the Trump administration. So let's just get started, and I want to leave enough time for discussion. In many of the assessments of the Trump presidency, there are two that stand out. On the one hand, we are encouraged to believe that the racism, corruption, and brutality of the Trump administration are a horrible but unique rupture with our recent past. We are told that this administration is a forward march towards progress. The midterm elections, the presidential election of 2016, meanwhile, are held out as opportunities to return to normal and to get back to the forward march. A second impact has been the creeping normalization of the administration's racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, its corruption and brutality. We know that these things risk becoming seen as normal when they barely warrant mention and simply meld into the background. The mass media become fatigued when the story lacks scandal or outrage, but as the practices of the Trump administration become more ingrained, they are seen as less outrageous, less scandalous, and they fall further from view and scrutiny. The country was outraged that the Trump administration was separating children from their parents and guardians at the southern border. But in the last several weeks, it has come to light that the Trump administration lost track of more than 2,000 children and has refused to assist in locating them. It has also come to light that this was actual policy of the Trump administration. But there's very little outrage today. Not because people don't care, but because the more these crises mount, the less it seems likely that anything can be done about it. The country has been outraged by the spectacle of police murders of African Americans. This, of course, preceded the Trump administration, but the continuation of this practice in combination with the administration's breathless defense of the police and its endless prattle about law and order creates the climate where all police killings are seen as justified, or at least discussed as such. So when a young black soldier named Emmanuel Bradford, who was on home for leave during Christmas in Birmingham, Alabama, went to the mall with his family and was subsequently shot from behind in his head, neck, and back, killed by the police, supposedly mistaken for a live shooter in the mall. It all just melds into the background. The Attorney General of Alabama predictably ruled that no crime had been committed and that the police officer would not be charged. The announcement by state officials outraged his mother, who asserted that his only crime was being black. But beyond Birmingham, there was no protest. Not because people no longer care about these issues, but as they continue to happen, people begin to think that they are permanent features of our society, impervious to change. The list of these things could go on, but the lack of organized response reinforces the perception that the always looming next election is the only tool that we have to stop the devolving crises that grip our society. But the narrative of a supposed norm erosion represented by the Trump administration threatens to obscure, if